In the 1992 US presidential election, all of the Democratic Party's nominees vowed that if they were elected that year, they would overturn the ban on gay people in the United States being able to serve openly in the nation's military. The ban on gays being able to serve openly had become increasingly more controversial and harder to defend. In 1971, the US ended the compulsory draft, which meant that the numbers of young people coming into the armed services were reducing significantly over the next couple of decades. On top of that, in 1974, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a mental disorder, which had been the major reason why gay people could not serve openly in the military. And even after the APA's decision to remove homosexuality as a disorder, then following that, over the next 2 decades, there were still hundreds of thousands of dollars spent by the military trying to out gay soldiers. And for the average American, and even for troops, armed forces troops, the math just wasn't adding up. It didn't make sense, particularly in the face of shrinking military budgets. When Bill Clinton was elected president that year, he followed true to his vow to overturn that policy, and like all things Washington, a special commission was assembled to really review the policy and make a recommendation to the Secretary of Defense and to the President. I was a major then. I was in my second tour of duty in the United States Air Force. I was a clinical psychologist, and I had been assigned to teach at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, a wonderful place to teach. It was a dream role for me. I loved psychology. I was a clinical psychologist. I loved teaching, and I loved leadership. And so the ideal role for me at the Air Force Academy was being able to teach 4,000 cadets around leadership, doing something that I loved and thought would make a tremendous difference. And so you can imagine how honored I was when the superintendent of the academy called me in to his office in January of 1993 and told me that I was one of 7 Air Force officers who was going to be sent to Washington to serve on this special commission to take a look at whether or not the ban on gays being able to serve openly would be overturned. That was incredible for me. General Hosmer told me that I was being sent to Washington to participate in this panel because of my outstanding service, because of my exemplary commitment to duty. And I took those things seriously because that's what an officer did. So it was a real honor for me. I wasn't going as a decision maker. I would be a flunky, I would be a doer, I was a major, I was a field grade officer. And so I was there to help write the policy, the training policy on whatever the panel's decision was at the end of the commission. But nevertheless, I was honored, being sent as one of 40 US military members being assembled from all over the globe to come to Washington and work on this very important project. And I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. 7 years earlier, I had lied on my application to become an officer in the United States Air Force. I lied a second time in my entry interview when I sat across from Captain Simpson in Indianapolis. And then I lied a third time when I stood and took the oath of office, the oath of being an officer, where I vowed to serve with honor and integrity. No matter how I tried to rationalize that lie in my head, there was just one particular question that wouldn't go away. Have you ever initiated or voluntarily engaged in any homosexual activity? That was a question that just wouldn't go away in my head. I had denied that question all of my life. That's what you did when you grew up gay. You learned to deny that, but I had never been asked to tick a box on paper. That became real for me, became a matter of record. It actually said on the application form, if the answer is yes, provide details. You can imagine that that wasn't going to happen. As was the case all my life, I lied to that question. But this time, that same lie that I've been telling all of my life, would take me up close and personal to a showdown with my own integrity. This time, that same lie would take me inside the tent where I would be serving with members who didn't want to serve with people like me. This time, that lie would take me up close and personal to an existential showdown with my own personal integrity. Look, I was an imposter. It was the first time in my life I felt like an imposter. Imposter syndrome is when you feel like you aren't really qualified for the role, but you meet all the criteria. But you just put a lot of pressure on yourself and you feel like you're not quite qualified for the role. I was the real deal. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was not only an imposter, they called me an exemplary imposter. I had the beautiful marriage, I had a perfect marriage. I had 2 beautiful daughters. I was on the school board. How much more exemplary can you get than that? Let me give you an example. We were holding a leadership seminar at a local hotel in Colorado Springs with a couple of hundred military members, 95% of them male. And we were all assembled out in a general area. And at that same hotel, a flight crew from United Airlines with a lot of very pretty flight attendants walked through. And as you can imagine, there was just a lot of fervor amongst all of these male troops as these pretty women walked by. One of my colleagues came over to me and said, "Harold, I'd just like to compliment you on how professional you are." While all of us are acting like savages, there you are, standing there, looking quite professional. It's just very impressive. You put all the rest of us to shame. What he doesn't know is that I never saw the flight attendants. That's how exemplary I was as an officer. For 3 months, we were sequestered in Washington, D.C. And we had groups for and against gay people being able to serve openly in the military come in to petition the commission. And I heard some of the worst things that I could ever hear about gay people being sick, psychiatrically ill, twisted people, morally depraved, criminal, going to hell. All of these things that I had heard all of my life, and it had been easy enough to dismiss then. I wasn't sitting in the tent. My integrity wasn't on trial in that respect. But I listened to these comments, and I thought, these are terrible indictments on people, depicting gay people as the lowest form of life, that gay people would compromise the psychological and the physical well-being of the straight troops, that gay people would ruin and bring down the esprit and the morale in the service. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm sitting here recognized for exemplary service and outstanding duty, and yet they're talking about these things. They weren't talking about hypothetical gay people in my mind. They were talking about me. They were talking about me. It became real for me then. I remember a poignant moment during one of the, when one of the groups came in to testify before the commission. The head panel was comprised of 3 general officers and an admiral. And we had a group come in, a pro-gay group, come in to present evidence that roughly 10 to 18% of the nation's armed forces were gay. And after they left, the admiral banged the table. He said, "This is ridiculous. They're inflating those numbers. I can tell you definitively that I have never served with and have never met anyone gay in the military." And I was just sitting a few feet away from him. And I felt, this is my 15 minutes of fame. I wanted to go up to him and extend my hand and say, "This is your lucky day, sir." But I didn't. That 15 minutes window passed, and like all imposters, I sat on my hands. There's power in symbolism, for the good or for the bad, but definitely power in symbolism. And the symbol that always will represent sort of that surge of integrity, what I call my beacon of integrity, was a bowl of fruit. When pro-gay groups would come in to petition the commission, the head panel would make sure that there was a bowl of fruit placed in the middle of the table. That same bowl of fruit was nowhere to be found when the anti-gay groups came in, who received a tangibly warmer reception. But whenever any group came in to advocate on behalf of gays being able to serve openly in the military, that bowl of fruit came out in the middle of the table, sort of a nod and a wink between mostly boys on the panel that we still are in charge. We'll put this bowl of fruit here, sort of symbolic of the fruits that are sitting on the other side of the table. And for 3 months, I had to stare across that bowl of fruit whenever there were people sitting on the other side of the table who were brave enough and more courageous than me to come in and stare into the face of adversity and make the case that people like me, who were too afraid to be open about who I was, could have the privilege of being able to serve my country as well. That bowl of fruit across 3 months really became emblazoned in my brain as a symbol and a beacon of integrity. At the end of 3 months, the commission disbanded. We had finished our core work. What eventually became Don't Ask, Don't Tell eventuated from the work of that panel. That policy was announced in December of 1993. Some Americans were really pleased with the outcome, believing that it moved the dial just a bit. That would mean that you could no longer ask the question, "Are you gay?" You would also not be able to pursue what we would call witch hunts in the military. But Don't Ask, Don't Tell still meant that being openly gay, you would not be able to really be a whole person in service to your country. History will ultimately determine whether or not the work of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in that policy really advanced the dial. But when we all went back to our respective bases, I received the Meritorious Service Medal for outstanding service to the United States. It was an incredible honor, and yet really mixed feelings associated with that. And I remember standing in a ceremony back at the academy with Colonel Rich Hughes pinning the medal on my uniform. And the scripture from the Christian Bible resonated with me at that very moment. It was the first time in my life that a scripture resonated with me so personally. For what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his own soul? I had another medal, an exhibit of outstanding service, but inside I was a hollow man with little integrity and no soul. It's rough inside the tent sometimes. I worked hard to fit inside the tent. You work hard to fit inside the tent. We go inside organizations every day, and we encounter a social order that requires us to turn down essential elements of who we are. For me, it was an essential part of my identity. It was an essential and inherent part of who I was. For others, it might be something as simple as a laugh. I'm working with a client who was told, your laugh is unintelligent, don't laugh. If you can imagine being able to suppress something as automatic as a laugh from your limbic system. A woman in the military who was told, don't bring pictures of your family in, it ruins the sense of combat, the call to arms, and so keep that out of here. Another woman who was told not to be so joyful. Turn down, how do you turn down joy in a person? Just a number of examples of what it's like to go inside the tent and not be able to be yourself. Integrity is a beautiful thing. Integrity means that you don't have to be one person over here and another person over here. It's less work. It's less hard work to be one person. It's hard to give of yourself when you don't like who you are. Your energy is held inward. You're more focused on not letting yourself out, which means that people can't make the connections that they need to with you. As a result of serving on that commission, I decided to leave the US military in December, the same month that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was announced. My wife and I divorced. We're still very good friends. We're bound together by 2 beautiful daughters and 1 grandchild and counting as we proceed. In September 2011, by decree of executive order, President Obama removed the ban on gays being able to serve openly in the US military. It was considered to be a huge day in the progress around diversity in the United States. And I thought back to the commission, and I thought back to whether or not it would ever be the case, if I could do it over again, would I sit on? I'd like to think that I would sit on the other side of that table, on the other side of that fruit bowl, and that I would come in, I would be able to stare into the face of adversity, and I would take a chance to stand out in order to make it easier for other people to fit in. I close by saying to you, don't ever lose your integrity for the sake of fitting in. Don't ever lose your soul for the sake of being accepted by others. Don't ever turn your persona down to the point where you lose that spirit and that energy to be able to give effectively. Be who you are. Trust me, it's worth it.